In 1722, on a stretch of beach outside Cape Coast Castle on the Gold Coast of West Africa, 52 men were hanged. They had sailed under Bartholomew Roberts, the most successful pirate captain of his age, and now, one by one, they stood before a Royal Navy tribunal to answer for their lives. Court clerks wrote down everything, every accusation, every excuse, every name. It remains one of the most complete pirate trial records ever preserved, and in all of it, in every surviving page, there is no mention of a black disc handed to a condemned man as a death sentence. That absence should not matter, except it does, because for almost 150 years, the black spot has been treated as an accepted piece of pirate history, taught in documentaries, repeated in books, printed on museum placards next to cutlasses and flintlocks. Somewhere along the way, it stopped being a story and became a fact. Nobody checked. So here is the real question this investigation is built around. If the most detailed pirate trial records in existence never mention it, if naval court archives across 2 centuries never mention it, then where did millions of people get the idea that it was real, what actually happened? And if the black spot itself never existed, what did? This is not a story about a myth being debunked. It is a story about how something false can be built entirely out of things that were true. The first person to seriously chase this question was not a novelist or a filmmaker. It was a maritime records researcher working through digitized Admiralty archives, cross-referencing pirate trial transcripts from the early 1700s. She had a simple task: confirm the earliest documented use of the black spot as a punishment. It sounded easy. It wasn't. She started where any historian would start, with the Cape Coast Castle trial. 981 men from Roberts's crew faced judgment there. The court asked pirates why they turned to piracy, whether they'd been forced aboard, whether they'd taken part in specific raids. Detailed, exhausting, precise, she read through statements about flogging, about marooning, about men shot for cowardice during a chase. Nothing about a marked token passed hand to hand as a warning of death. That should have been the end of it. A missing detail in one trial record isn't proof of anything. Maybe it happened somewhere else. Maybe it happened on a ship whose logs never survived, which was common. Most pirate vessels didn't keep official records at all, for obvious reasons. So she expanded the search. She pulled depositions connected to Blackbeard's final months in 1718, court records from the trial of Stede Bonnet, and surviving fragments referencing Charles Vane's crew. Same result. Nothing. Whatever the black spot was, it wasn't showing up where pirate punishment actually got written down by the people who prosecuted it. At this point, most researchers would have quietly moved on. She didn't, because something about the phrase itself started bothering her. It was too specific, too clean. Real historical customs, the kind that emerge organically among sailors, tend to be messy, inconsistent, described differently by different witnesses. The black spot, by contrast, appeared in every retelling almost identically: a round black mark, handed silently, a death sentence with no explanation needed. That kind of consistency usually means one thing: someone wrote it down once, in one place, and everyone else copied it afterward. Which raised an uncomfortable possibility. What if the black spot wasn't obscure pirate folklore that historians simply failed to document? What if it had a single point of origin, a specific person, a specific page, sometime long after the golden age of piracy had already ended? That would mean the entire legend had a birth certificate, and birth certificates can be traced. The trail led somewhere nobody expected, not to a pirate ship, not to a naval archive, to a writer's desk in Bournemouth, England, in the year 1881. Robert Louis Stevenson was ill that winter, confined mostly to indoor life, filling notebooks with an adventure story he was writing partly to entertain his stepson. The book was Treasure Island, and somewhere in its pages an old blind pirate named Pew delivers a folded piece of paper with a black circle drawn on one side to Billy Bones, a former shipmate hiding out at an English inn. The paper is a death warrant. The men who sent it are hunting him down. It is one of the most famous scenes in the novel. It is also, as far as any surviving primary source can confirm, the first time the black spot appears anywhere in written history. That detail alone should stop the investigation cold. If a novelist invented it, the mystery is solved, and there is nothing left to explain. Except researchers who studied Stevenson's working notes and letters found something odd. He rarely invented details from nothing. Stevenson was known for weaving together real maritime folklore, ship terminology, and details lifted almost directly from Captain Charles Johnson's 1724 book, A General History of the Pirates, one of the only first-hand accounts of the era's most famous crews. He borrowed real pirate names, real ship rigging terms, real geography. So why would he suddenly invent something as specific as a black-marked token out of nowhere, with no basis at all? A curator working with Stevenson's surviving manuscripts found a partial answer in an overlooked marginal note, a short reference to an old sailor's superstition Stevenson claimed to have heard secondhand, involving blackened tokens used to settle gambling debts among dockworkers. Not pirates, dockworkers, men loading and unloading cargo in port towns, men who lived on credit, threats, and reputation, men whose disputes rarely made it into any official court record because nobody with authority cared enough to write them down. If that note was accurate, then the object existed, just not where anyone had been looking for it. This is where the investigation should have narrowed. Instead, it widened. Because a blackened token used to enforce a debt among dockworkers sounds less like pirate punishment and more like something else entirely. It sounds like organized intimidation, the kind used in smuggling networks, where men needed a way to mark someone as a liability without leaving written evidence that could later be used against them in court. And smuggling networks operated constantly in the same ports pirates used to resupply, hide, and sell stolen goods. Bristol, Kingston, Port Royal before its destruction. Nassau is where the next piece of evidence surfaced, and it changed the shape of the entire investigation. Between 1713 and 1718, Nassau functioned as something closer to an independent pirate republic than a lawless port. Men like Benjamin Hornigold and briefly Blackbeard himself operated under informal governing structures, not chaos. Surviving accounts, cross-referenced by multiple maritime historians independently, describe pirate crews using written articles, agreements every man signed before a voyage, laying out rules, punishments, and how profits would be split. Violations weren't settled by whoever held the sharpest knife. They were settled by crew vote. A man accused of theft, cowardice, or concealment of loot could be formally tried by his own shipmates, and if convicted, formally condemned. Not through a symbol, through a process. That detail should have felt like a resolution. It wasn't. It was the moment the entire investigation turned upside down, because it meant something far stranger than a fabricated symbol was hiding underneath it. If pirate crews really did operate under structured, almost democratic systems of justice, complete with written contracts and majority votes on execution, then the truth being uncovered wasn't smaller than the legend. It was bigger, and far more unsettling to people who had spent careers assuming pirates were simply violent men without rules. Because if that assumption was wrong, the next question became impossible to avoid. What else had historians gotten wrong about how pirate ships actually worked, and why had nobody seriously questioned it until now? A pirate historian working on crew governance sat with a photocopy of Bartholomew Roberts' ship's articles for a long time before saying anything. These weren't fragments pieced together from rumor. They were preserved in outline inside Johnson's general history, quoted almost word for word from the original document taken off Roberts' ship after his death. 11 articles. Every man aboard had signed them, or made his mark if he couldn't write. Article after article laid out real, specific law. No gambling for money aboard. Lights and candles extinguished by 8 at night. Any man deserting or concealing plunder from the company would be marooned or shot. Every man had a vote in affairs of moment. Every man had an equal share of fresh provisions. This was not the picture most people carried in their heads. Pirates weren't lawless men killing on impulse. They were men bound by contract, voted into command, voted into punishment. Operating a system stricter in some ways than the one aboard a Royal Navy warship, where officers answered to no vote at all. That realization landed hard, and not just historically. It struck the historians working the case on a personal level. Careers had been built describing pirate crews as chaotic, disorganized, driven purely by savagery. If that description was incomplete, decades of assumptions needed revisiting. Nobody enjoys discovering the foundation of their own expertise was standing on unexamined ground. At first, this looked like the final answer. It wasn't, because a written article listing punishable offenses is not the same as a symbol used to warn a man his death had already been decided. The articles explained the legal system. They didn't explain the specific chilling ritual the legend described, a silent object passed hand to hand, delivered without a word, understood instantly by the man receiving it. So the investigation asked a harder question. Where would a symbol like that actually be useful? Not aboard a ship where formal articles and open votes already handled judgment. Somewhere, judgment needed to stay hidden. That answer came from an unexpected direction. A maritime crime researcher studying 18th century smuggling networks along the English and Caribbean coastlines. Smugglers moving contraband rum, sugar, and untaxed goods through ports like Bristol operated under constant threat of informants. A single loose tongue could bring customs officers down on an entire operation, and unlike pirate crews at sea, smugglers on land couldn't hold an open vote to execute a suspected informant. That would leave witnesses. Confessions, evidence, what they needed was silence. A warning delivered privately, understood immediately, leaving nothing written down that any court could later use. A blackened token, passed quietly. No explanation required, because everyone already knew what it meant. That detail connected directly back to the marginal note in Stevenson's own manuscript, the one describing dockworker debt tokens. Dockworkers and smugglers weren't separate worlds. In port towns like Bristol, they were often the same men, moving between legal cargo work and illegal cargo work depending on the week. The token used to enforce a gambling debt and the token used to silence an informant may have been the exact same object, repurposed by exact same population in the exact same streets. This is where the consequence of the entire investigation became impossible to ignore. If the Black Spot's real ancestor lived in the world of dockside debt collection and smuggling intimidation, not open ocean piracy, then 2 centuries of books, films, and documentaries had confidently placed a real historical practice in entirely the wrong setting, attributing it to entirely the wrong people, and nobody with access to primary sources had stopped to check. The mystery had grown from one missing detail in a single trial record into something with real historical weight. 3 separate practices: gambling debt enforcement among dockworkers, informant silencing among smugglers, and formal crew voted execution under written pirate articles, all quietly converging toward the same imagined moment. A silent black mark. A man who already knew his fate, but something still didn't fit. If Stevenson pulled from dockworker superstition and pirate legal codes existed independently through written articles, why did the 2 ideas fuse so convincingly that entire generations accepted the combination as documented fact? Something had made the fiction feel more true than the truth itself, and that answer was still missing. The answer to why the fiction felt more true than the truth came from a place nobody in the investigation expected to matter: the reading habits of the British public in the late 19th century. By 1881, when Treasure Island first appeared as a serial in Young Folks magazine, the golden age of piracy had already been over for more than 150 years. Most readers had no access to Admiralty trial transcripts, no way to check Cape Coast Castle records, no reason to doubt anything Stevenson wrote, because his novel wasn't presented as history. It was presented as adventure. And adventure fiction, unlike a court transcript, is allowed to compress complicated truths into a single, unforgettable image. That is exactly what happened. Stevenson took something real, the existence of dockside intimidation tokens used among dubious characters. He took something else real, the knowledge, likely secondhand and imperfect, that pirate crews operated under strict codes with real consequences for betrayal. And he fused both into one clean, silent, terrifying object. Because a folded paper with a black circle makes a better scene than a page of legal articles read aloud by a ship's quartermaster. It worked so well that later writers, filmmakers, and even some careless historians assumed Stevenson must have been documenting something rather than dramatizing it. Once the image entered popular imagination, it never left. Each retelling added authority the original never had. By the 20th century, museum exhibits and documentary narrators were repeating it as established fact, not because anyone had found new evidence, but because nobody expected fiction to have infiltrated history so completely. Here is where the investigation reaches its final, quiet turn, because uncovering that the black spot was invented does not mean the fear behind it was invented too. It means the opposite. Condemned men aboard pirate ships did face something almost as chilling as the legend describes. Under written articles like Roberts' crew followed, a man accused of cowardice, theft, or concealment did not face an angry mob. He faced a vote, taken by name, in front of the same men he had eaten and fought alongside for months. There was no symbol needed, because the silence came from watching your own shipmates decide one by one whether you deserved to live. That process, documented, verified, preserved in surviving articles and trial testimony, was arguably more disturbing than a folded paper ever could be. Because it was real, and because it came from people you trusted. The black spot survived for nearly a century and a half, not because it was true, but because it captured something true underneath it, the idea that a pirate crew held the power of formal collective judgment over every man who sailed with them, and that judgment, once passed, could not be undone by pleading or protest. Stevenson didn't invent that fear. He gave it a shape simple enough to remember. So the central question this investigation set out to answer gets resolved, but not the way it began. The black spot was never handed to a condemned man on any pirate ship during the golden age of piracy. No trial record, no naval archive, no surviving ship's log supports it. It was assembled from dockside superstition and smuggling world intimidation, then fused permanently into pirate mythology by one novelist's pen, and repeated as fact by nearly everyone who came after him without checking the original sources. But the deeper history it accidentally preserved is real. Pirate crews really did operate under binding written contracts. They really did vote on a man's fate. They really did carry out sentences with a formality that most people still don't associate with piracy at all. Which leaves one final thought worth sitting with. If one of the most widely repeated pieces of pirate history turned out to be an invented symbol standing in for an even stranger documented truth, how many other pieces of history that feel completely certain are standing on the same kind of unexamined ground, waiting for someone to actually go back and check the original page? If this investigation changed the way you think about pirate history, subscribe for more real mysteries pulled from forgotten records, old maps, and the stories history almost got wrong.